Internal studio memo, Paramount Pictures, 1966. Delete this immediately. Force a conflict between the leads. The nice guy routine is killing our marketing, and we need a scandal to sell tickets. This was the directive sent down by the suits, who couldn't understand how two of the biggest stars in the world weren't trying to claw each other's eyes out. Hollywood is built on the ego tax, a system where every dollar spent on a star comes with a mandatory side of tantrums and trailer demands. But Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau were the only two men who broke the industry's business model of manufactured drama. They made 10 movies over 50 years and never had a single argument. Not one. Zero ego. While the studios were desperately praying for a glass of water to be thrown or a trailer door to be slammed in a fit of rage, these two were just quietly laughing over a crossword puzzle in the corner of a dusty soundstage. If you're the type of person who needs fake celebrity beef and scripted Twitter wars to stay entertained, you should probably click off this video right now. This story is strictly for those who want to see how the industry machine actually failed to corrupt a real Bond. Only the brave stay here to see the truth, so hit subscribe if you're part of that inner circle. Now look at the first piece of this puzzle. Picture the set of The Odd Couple in 1968. You have the smell of stale beer, the cloud of cigar smoke, and the sound of a typewriter clicking away. The studio heads were lurking in the shadows, waiting for a spark to fly. They wanted Matthau to explode at Lemmon's obsessive perfectionism. They wanted Lemmon to crack under Matthau's gambling-induced mood swings and grumpy exterior. But the explosion never came. Instead, they found a rhythm that made the directors feel irrelevant. The industry thrives on friction because friction creates headlines. But Lemmon and Matthau were a total mirage in a desert of vanity. Look at the contracts from their later years. Usually, high-priced agents fight over who gets the bigger font on the movie poster or who gets the first credit in the trailer. It's a literal war of millimeters. But when the lawyers tried to pit them against each other for the 1993 hit Grumpy Old Men, Lemmon just waved them away like he was swatting a fly. He didn't care about the font. He didn't care about the trailer size. He just wanted to know what time Walter was showing up for work. Be brutally honest now. Have you ever seen two co-workers in your life who could spend 50 years together without a single blow-up? It doesn't happen in the real world, and it certainly doesn't happen in the viper pit of 1970s Hollywood. The machine tried to manufacture a rivalry to boost the box office, but the gears just kept slipping because these two were operating on a level the suits couldn't quantify. They were a two-man army against the studio system, and the next piece of this puzzle reveals the secret pact they made that the public was never supposed to hear about. That secret pact wasn't some legal document locked in a safe. It was a handshake in a trailer filled with the smell of cheap coffee and expensive tobacco. They decided right then that the director was the secondary boss. The real boss was the guy standing across from them in the scene. If Walter didn't buy the delivery, Jack didn't move on. If Jack felt the rhythm was off, Walter would demand another take, even if the studio heads were screaming about the budget. Imagine the scene. They created a private bubble that no executive could penetrate. You there, sitting at home, think about your own job. Could you ignore your boss to help a coworker look better? Most people would jump at the chance to steal the spotlight. In Hollywood, that's not just common, it's the standard operating procedure. But Lemmon and Matthau were built differently. Look at the physical evidence on the set of the front page in 1974. Walter was a mess. He was deeply addicted to gambling. He'd spend his lunch breaks on the phone with bookies, losing thousands of dollars on horses that didn't have a prayer. He would walk back onto the set with his shoulders slumped, his face gray, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 60 minutes. Any other actor would have used that weakness to dominate the scene. They would have chewed the scenery and made Walter look like a background extra. But look at Jack Lemmon's eyes in those scenes. He isn't trying to outshine his friend. He's leaning in. He's giving Walter the space to find his footing. He's acting as a human crutch. He was the anchor that kept Matthau from drifting out to sea. This wasn't some noble sacrifice. It was a tactical alliance. They knew that if one of them looked bad, the movie failed. They understood a truth that the modern ego-driven influencer era has completely forgotten. Now, let's talk about the money. Hollywood is a place where people sue their own mothers for a back-end point. But these two had a deal that would make a modern talent agent faint. During the height of their fame, they would often refuse to sign a contract unless the other was involved, or at least consulted. When the script for Grumpy Old Men landed on Jack's desk in the early 90s, the producers were terrified. They thought these two legends would demand separate trailers of equal size, separate hairstylists, and a war over whose name appeared first in the opening credits. Be brutally honest now. You've heard the stories of modern divas refusing to come out of their trailers because their water wasn't the right temperature. Now, picture two 70-year-old men standing in the freezing snow of Minnesota. The wind is howling. The production is behind schedule. The producers are biting their nails, waiting for the inevitable blow-up. Instead, they found Walter and Jack huddled under a single heat lamp, sharing a thermos of soup and making fun of the director's shoes. They didn't care about the perks. They didn't care about the legend status. They were just two guys doing a job. But the industry couldn't handle that level of normalcy. The press kept trying to dig up dirt. They interviewed lighting techs, makeup artists, and disgruntled extras, looking for one story of a fight. They found nothing. A total vacuum of drama. It was a mirage for the tabloids, but a fortress for the two men inside. But here is the piece of the puzzle that really stings. In 1966, Walter Matthau had a massive heart attack. He was a heavy smoker, a heavy eater, and the stress of his gambling debts was crushing him. He was in a hospital bed, looking at the end of his career before it really peaked. Most friends in the industry would have sent a bouquet of flowers and then called their agent to see what roles were now available. But Jack Lemmon didn't just send flowers. He showed up. He sat in that hospital room for hours. He didn't talk about scripts. He didn't talk about the industry. He just sat there. And when Walter finally got out, Jack made it his mission to get him back on screen. He pushed for Walter in movies where the studios wanted younger, healthier, more reliable stars. Jack put his own reputation on the line to keep his friend relevant. This is the part where the industry machine really started to grind its gears. They couldn't understand why a man at the top of his game would risk it all for a guy who was considered a liability. But that's because the machine only sees humans as assets. Jack saw a brother. And that leads us to the most heartbreaking piece of this entire story. Fast forward to the year 2000. Walter's health was failing for real this time. The gambling had stopped, but the years of hard living had caught up. He was in the hospital, and the end was close. Jack was there, of course, but he wasn't just a visitor. He was a ghost of his former self. He was battling his own secret war with cancer, a fact he kept hidden from almost everyone. He was in immense physical pain, but he refused to leave Walter's side. Think about the visual of that room. Two of the greatest comedians in history, the men who made millions of people laugh until they cried, sitting in silence in a sterile hospital ward. There were no cameras, no PR teams, no exclusive interviews. Just the sound of a heart monitor. When Walter passed away in July of 2000, the world mourned a comedic genius. But Jack Lemmon didn't just mourn. He collapsed. The straight man had lost his anchor. The industry expected a big televised memorial, with Jack giving a witty, charming speech about the good old days. They wanted one last performance. But Jack couldn't do it. He was hollowed out. The truth is, he didn't want to live in a world where he couldn't call Walter to complain about a bad script or a losing horse. Here is the kicker, the piece that completes the frame of this puzzle. Jack Lemmon died almost exactly 1 year later. Some say it was the cancer. Others who were in those rooms, who saw the way he looked after Walter was gone, knew the truth. He didn't have a reason to stay on stage anymore. The duet was over. But why does this matter to you? Because we live in an age of manufactured squad goals and fake celebrity friendships designed to sell movie tickets. You see them on Instagram, smiling and posing, only to find out they haven't spoken in 3 years. Lemmon and Matthau were the antidote to that poison. They proved that you can survive the viper pit of fame without losing your soul, as long as you have one person who knows the real you. They were buried near each other in the same cemetery. Even in the end, they didn't let the industry separate them. They ignored the leading man rules and chose a partnership that redefined what it meant to be a star. The machine tried to break them, tried to pit them against each other, and tried to exploit their weaknesses. But the machine failed. It failed because you can't corrupt something that isn't for sale. Now look at the big picture. We've laid out the corners, the loyalty, the shared failures, and the secret pacts. We've filled in the edges, the gambling, the hospital stays, and the refusal to play the ego game. What's left is the center of the puzzle. The image isn't of two movie stars. It's an image of two men who realized that the lights, the money, and the applause are all temporary, but a hand on a shoulder in a dark room is permanent. If you're still here, it's because you know that this kind of bond is the only thing that actually matters. So, the next time you see a celebrity feud trending on your feed, remember Jack and Walter. Remember the soup in the snow. Remember the silence in the hospital room. And ask yourself if you have anyone in your life who would sit in that chair for you. That's the real story. That's the piece that makes everything else fit. If you want more deep dives into the real stories the industry tries to hide, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because the next puzzle we're pieces together is even darker. The studio executives were already looking at the spreadsheets before Walter's body was even cold. They wanted to know how much his death would cost the production schedule and which insurance policies would trigger a payout. That is the Hollywood reality. You are a valuable asset until the moment you become a liability. The machine tried to turn their bond into a cartoonish brand for decades, pushing for one more sequel and one more pay. Dying in that hospital bed? There were no cameras. There were no publicists. There was just Jack, sitting in a plastic chair watching the heart monitor beep. No one will believe you when you tell them this. Subscribe to find others who do. Most people think these two were just lucky, but they were actually fighting a war against an industry that wanted to commodify their love. They refused to let the PR teams script their lives. I don't waste your time, you don't waste mine. Subscribe if you value substance. Here is the final piece of the puzzle. The industry took their health, their privacy, and their energy for 40 years, squeezing every cent out of their chemistry until there was nothing left to give. The machine got its movies and the audiences got their laughs, but the cost was two men who were so physically and emotionally linked that they couldn't survive without each other. Jack died almost exactly 1 year after Walter. They spent their lives making millions for people who didn't care if they lived or died, and in the end, they were buried in the same patch of dirt. The studio got the money, but Jack and Walter got the last laugh. The studio executives didn't send flowers to the funeral because they were grieving. They sent them because it was a tax-deductible PR expense. While the fans were crying in front of their TV sets, the suits were already in boardrooms looking for the next two actors they could pair up to recreate that magic. They wanted a younger, cheaper version of the same chemistry. They didn't care that Jack and Walter were unique. To the industry, they were just high-performing assets that had finally reached their expiration date. The truth is that Hollywood never saw a friendship. They saw a franchise. They pushed these two men to work through illnesses, through exhaustion, and through personal crises just to keep the production wheels turning. It was a grind that would have broken anyone else. These two survived it only because they had each other to lean on when the cameras stopped rolling. Subscribe only if you have the stomach to watch until the end. I am telling you the parts of the story that the studio archives have tried to erase for decades. They want you to think it was all smiles and blooper reels. It wasn't. It was a battle for survival in a town that eats its legends alive. Subscribe before videos like this get sanitized or taken down by the legal teams that protect the Hollywood image. Here is the final piece of the puzzle that the industry wants you to forget. The studio didn't just take their talent. They took their time. They took the years these men could have spent with their families and traded them for box office receipts. Even at the very end, when Walter was struggling to breathe and Jack was fading away, the phone calls from the agents didn't stop. They were still asking about one more cameo, one more interview, one more way to squeeze $1 out of a